Welcome everybody to today's session. We're just going to give it another minute before we get started to let more people join as the stream starts. But if you can say hello in the chat box to make sure that you can hear us okay and you can see us okay, that would be fantastic. I am joined by my colleague Emily, who we're going to be bringing on in just a moment as well to talk about today's session, which is why businesses urgently need to track mental health first aid conversations. So whether this is your first time joining an Every Mind session or whether you've been on them before, welcome to everybody joining in. I can already see hundreds of you in the chat box, which is fantastic to see as well. So welcome everyone. And as I've mentioned in today's session, we're going to be looking at tracking mental health first aid conversations. And it's a divisive topic. Many people say that you should, many people say that you shouldn't. And we are going to sort of shine the light on that topic here in today's session to talk about when it's done correctly, it's going to really help you prove the effectiveness of your mental health first aid network and also be able to protect those that are supporting others as well. So just before we do get started, it would be great to hear from you if this is your first session with us. So if it's your first session, just give me a yes in the chat box. Welcome Sam, welcome Elizabeth, Julie, Lisa, Chloe. There's lots of newcomers on the session, which is fantastic to see. But I can also see some names that are very familiar. Matt, who we saw last week at the Sector Summit, and many others that have been on our sessions before as well. So welcome everyone. So specifically, what we're going to be going through is we're going to be sharing some groundbreaking insights into mental health first aid and champions networks that we've gathered from supporting businesses over the past 2 years through the platform and the support that we have at Every Mind as well. One of the key things that we're also going to be looking at is we're going to be highlighting the 3 reasons, again, why you should be tracking conversations moving forward when it comes to your mental health first aid network too. And we're going to be really talking about some of the challenges that you'll have with your mental health first aid networks, specifically if you are not tracking conversations. So we've got a lot to go through here in today's session. And before we do get started, I'd love to hear from you once again in the chat box. How many mental health first aiders do you have, or how many wellbeing champions do you have within your business? Because that's going to help me and Emily get a bit more insight into how we can bring the most value to you in the next hour, no matter where you are in your journey as well. So again, we can see some of us here today only have maybe under 10, others hundreds. So everyone here is on a different journey. Everyone here has a different experience, but we'll do our best to tailor today's session to bring you that value as well. So I'm going to bring Emily in just a moment, but for those that don't know who I am or who Every Mind are, I'm Paul. I'm the founder of Every Mind at Work, and we're on a mission to reinvent mental health first aid in the workplace. We do this through our platform and our partnership, supporting hundreds of brands in the process, and we train, we engage, and we protect mental health first aiders and champions within organizations. We always call it support for the supporters, which is definitely something that's lacking with the amount of awareness and conversations that are now occurring within businesses as well. And we're a team of passionate individuals at Every Mind, and I'm very grateful to be joined by just one of them today. I always call her the data queen to embarrass her, Emily. So Emily, can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what you do at Every Mind?
Yep. Hi everyone, I'm Emily. I'm a business psychologist, specialised in employee wellbeing. At Every Mind, I lead the team, partner development team, so our wellbeing business consultants who work with our partners sort of day in, day out to support them with their wellbeing initiatives, and particularly obviously today talking about how we can look at the insights we've gained from working with people who do track their mental health first aid conversations.
Good stuff. And as I've already mentioned, Emily's going to be sharing a lot of those insights, a lot of the data that we've got, and also some real life case studies of the businesses that we support when it comes to the work that we do as well. But before we move forward today and we talk about data, I wanted to also make it real because I was reflecting on the train this morning. Yesterday, it was in fact my dad's anniversary. So for those people that know, the reason why Every Mind started, the reason why I'm very passionate about today's session is because I lost my dad to suicide. And it was 16 years ago yesterday. And I was really thinking about that experience on the train up here of how much has changed since that time. But, awareness is probably at an all-time high. But I think a lot of people still struggle to have these difficult conversations. And also, as we're going to look at here as well, there's so many mental health first aiders that sign up or want to become a mental health first aider because of their lived experience like I have. And that lived experience is the strength that they have to really want to help people in a business. But it's also the biggest vulnerability that they have, because even yesterday, 16 years on from losing my dad, I still found myself in difficult times because, experiences like that never go away. And I wanted to share that before we go on to some of the data and some of the specifics in today's session, because I want people to think about that as we move forward. When we have these individuals in the business that really want to support others, we've got to make sure and ensure that the support is in place for them. And a lot of that comes down to tracking conversations, which we're going to be going through as well. So before we do dive into today's session, one of the other sort of points that I want to highlight, as I've already highlighted too, is we do these sessions every single month. And next month is a really important one. We're going to be talking about why mental health first aid isn't safe in the workplace. And I'm going to be joined by two incredible guests, Peter Kelly, who we've had on the session before, and Stuart Mace. And they're going to be diving into that topic in particular. Again, these guests are experts looking at it from a health and safety lens. What are the risks? What are the liabilities of having mental health first aid in its current form within businesses as well? So there should be a link popping up in just a moment. If you can obviously see that link, sign up to that session. It's completely for free. And once again, that's on April the 9th on Wednesday at 1 p.m. I'm joined by Peter Kelly and Stuart Mace as well. So before we get started, I think it's important to, again, want to start with an overview. I think when we was looking at this session here today, it's been driven by the work that we do at EveryMind. Mental health first aid was a training course. Mental health first aid is a training course. But the problem is it's been introduced to businesses, and along the way, it's been turned into a role. And that's where a lot of challenge comes. That's where a lot of risk comes, because now we have mental health first aiders in businesses that have had some training, and we're signposting colleagues to speak to these individuals with no oversight and no, obviously, way of seeing what's going on there as well. And 90% of businesses, I would say, have mental health first aiders, but they've done it in the old way, not the new approach that we're going to be going through today of making sure that you train, you engage, you protect, and you have that visibility of the network through tracking conversations. And it's really important that we start to shift that focus, and as I mentioned earlier, reinvent mental health first aid in the workplace. And a key part of the work that we do at EveryMind and the platform that we have is logging conversations. And in a recent report that we'll share in just a moment as well, we discovered that 40% of HR professionals tracking mental health first aid conversations believe that their network's effective, versus just 4% of those that are not tracking conversations. So again, if we're not tracking conversations, how do we know if this initiative is effective or not? When we don't, we're simply guessing whether this is a successful initiative or not as well. So talking about mental health first aid conversations in particular, I'm going to bring Emily in just a minute to talk about it from, again, the companies that we work with. But it often splits opinions. In the chat box, let me know, yes or no. Do you think that mental health first aiders should be tracking conversations in their business? I'd be interested in your opinions, because a lot of people, again, will start to question confidentiality and a lot of that, which we're going to be exploring in just a moment. But it always sort of baffles us that we tend to track a lot in businesses. I read somewhere that a business was tracking how often employees use the toilet, which is baffling to me. But when it comes to well-being and when it comes to mental health and mental health first aid, we're very skeptical about measuring the impact and the effectiveness of it as well. But if you've got mental health first aiders in your business supporting people in high-risk situations, complex challenges around mental health, but you have no visibility of what's going on, that really starts to open up a lot of risk and a lot of liability to your business and that network too. So we're here to tell you why you should be tracking mental health first aid conversations. So Em, in your experience, why would you say, what are some of the reasons why businesses don't track conversations?
I think from conversations, there's sort of three key reasons that people are hesitant to track. I think the first is that they don't know how to track conversations appropriately. The second, and we hear this all the time, is we don't want to open a can of worms. And then the third, I think organisations do worry that with the confidentiality piece that you mentioned, that it might actually hinder the approachability of the network and the trust that employees have. And when you look at that first one, looking at people don't know how to track effectively, they're worried about confidentiality. They're worried or don't know what to track or how to track it. I think with the can of worms analogy, people think that by tracking, they're then going to be creating an obligation to act that they're maybe not prepared for currently. In reality, if you don't track, the risks are higher, and it's trying to get people to understand that narrative. And then the third one, where people are worried that actually it will reduce the approachability of the network itself. We've found that actually when you are logging those conversations, having that data, it increases trust in the network, because from an organisational perspective, it shows that you are prioritising mental health, you care about your employees, and most importantly, when you've got that data and you act on it, you're showing them that that's the reason why you're collecting that data, and this is the impact it can have, and you're using it preventatively.
I think, again, as you touched on there, and it was interesting to see, which is great to see, there's lots of people saying yes in the chat box, that they do track conversations, but I saw one or two say no, the risk of confidentiality being broken is too high. But I think as Emily mentioned there, like, if you do it in a way where confidentiality can't be broken or won't be broken, or you have oversight when it is, and you can address that, then there's the benefits of logging conversations far outweigh that potential challenge. But what we tend to see is many businesses do attempt to track mental health first aid interactions, and they'll tend to do that through spreadsheets or EHS systems or the free mental health first aid app that's provided after the training, or Google Forms as an example. But again, it's making sure that you have that robust strategy in place, that the data is secure. That's one thing to really focus on. Is that data that's being fed into any of those methods secure? But also, as we've mentioned, is it confidential? You know, if there's ability for people to add names and personal information and break that confidentiality, then that definitely needs to be addressed. And again, I think because of those challenges, it means, once again, we don't put these mechanisms in place to track conversations, because we've got to make sure that it's secure and we're not breaking confidentiality as well. So we're going to dive a little bit more into that. But as Emily mentioned, we have to have that feedback loop. If we don't have the feedback loop, there's mental health first aiders and champions out there having conversations. We have no oversight or no knowledge of what they're saying or what colleagues are struggling with or how overwhelmed the mental health first aider feels. So it's really important that we start to do that as well. But a lot of businesses are still doing nothing at all. But it's important with that feedback loop and with logging of conversations, and what we're going to dive into in just a moment as well, that we start to get that insight that is needed for the business. Again, one of the key things that I just want to highlight before we move forward is, when we're looking at this data, it's important that the business owns it and not the individual. Again, I've heard of horror stories where, you know, the individual is storing confidential conversations on notes in their phone, or they're writing them and they're storing them on their laptop. Or again, you know, if the individual has access to an app that they are storing those conversations, if they then leave the business and they take those conversations with them, again, we can potentially be breaching confidentiality there as well. So again, we're going to dive into it in a lot more detail, but it's important that you have a robust system where mental health first aiders can log the conversations anonymously, but that can then provide the feedback to you, the leader of the business, or the business as a whole, to see what's the impact, what can we do from a preventative point of view to make this network stronger as well. So we have a lot of what we're going to be sharing today. We're going to go through lots of insights, lots of data. A few months ago, we actually shared the Everymind report on the mental health first aid effectiveness within workplaces. And we want to reshare that again in today's session, because there's been a lot of interesting insights from that data report we captured from 700 plus businesses, over hundreds of mental health first aiders. And you should be able to now see a pop-up with that report and that resource. You can download that, give it a read after today's session, and gain some further insights off the back of today's session as well. But we also, excitingly, have an up and coming report. So we're going to be bringing a lot of the data that Emily and myself are going to be sharing in today's session, again, across 2 years of the Everymind platform and the conversations that are being logged confidentially, to look at, once again, what are some of the insights that we've learned there as well. So if you want to be the first to hear about that up and coming report, then again, you should see another link popping up in just a moment. Subscribe and we'll share it with you as soon as the report is ready, and it won't be long. So again, if you want to be the first to hear about that report and access it, you should be able to sign up in just a moment, and we're going to be able to get that to you as soon as it's ready as well. So let's talk about 3 reasons why businesses urgently need to start tracking mental health first aid conversations. And I think the first one that we want to touch on is safety. So Em, from your experience of working with the partners that we work with, can you talk through why logging conversations firstly protects the mental health first aid themselves?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I always like to talk about is that actually it removes the responsibility falling solely on the mental health first aiders. This is an organisational initiative. The conversations and the insight that has and the demand that has on the mental health first aider should never end with them. They are there to have a listening ear, signpost to support. So by logging those conversations, it's taking that weight off their shoulders. They're passing that responsibility figuratively on to the business. The biggest part of conversation tracking for me and the protection it gives the mental health first aiders is that we ask them, once they've logged the conversation, how did they feel as the mental health first aider? And what we've found from a lot of the mental health first aiders we've spoken to is that they would never have stopped to consider that prior to having our platform on board. They haven't taken a moment after those sometimes very challenging conversations to reflect on how they are. And when they do respond on the platform, we then provide them with resources, signposting and access to one-to-one support if they need it. So if they are struggling after that conversation, and like you mentioned, a lot of mental health first aiders do this role because they're either highly empathetic or they have their own personal experiences. So these conversations can be challenging, they can be quite overwhelming. So our one-to-one support in particular, our team reach out to them if they have marked they are struggling after a conversation or they're not okay. And what that does is that gives them an ability to check in on themselves, speak to us. And most of the time, our one-to-one team are actually talking about reassurance. It's not anything too sort of debrief related or challenging topics they're unsure how to cope with. It's actually they just need reassurance they did the right thing. And quite often in organisations we find that currently without our support, that's one person. It's typically the network lead or the wellbeing lead, and they almost become a single point of failure for the organisation, because if they're off sick or they're not available, who do the mental health first aiders turn to? So by having that third party there in us to support them, the mental health first aiders have said it's so reassuring just to know that they've got that support. But also from a business perspective, they know that they've got well-trained, equipped people to support them with whatever they need. And I think beyond that, long term, the safety of the network, by having this data, we're able to look at any gaps and opportunities in the support that the mental health first aiders themselves need. So a good example of putting that in practice is Julius Baer, one of our partners. They noticed that there was a single mental health first aider, in one area of the business that was having a lot of conversations, and actually it wasn't good for them and their mental health. So they then recruited more people in that area. Without that information, without that feedback loop that you were talking about earlier, they would never have known that mental health first aider was having all those conversations and needed additional support. So it's about using the data to protect the mental health first aiders themselves.
I think whenever we start working with companies, as you say, that feature of asking the mental health first aider how they feel is always kind of, it's almost an important point of data, because as you highlighted, and I know through my experience, as I said earlier, 16 years on, and I can still be triggered. I can still be taken back to that moment where it happened. And I think if I felt like I didn't have that supervision, that guidance and that support, I then wouldn't be confident to have the conversations. It's really important that we protect the network, and being able to log conversations is one way in which we can do that too. But then also let's talk about, safety for the person, because as we've mentioned, is it going to potentially not make people trusting to speak to a mental health first aider if we know that conversations are confidentially being logged? But what is about the safety of the person they're supporting, but then also the safety for the wider business when we log conversations?
So I think the first piece is that as an organisation, when they log the conversations, you can see where people are being signposted to. You can make sure that people aren't falling through the cracks. What we notice is that actually EAP usage might increase when you see that actually a lot of mental health first aiders are signposting people to the EAP, or managers suddenly report that actually they're getting a lot more conversations. What you can then do with that is utilising, for example, with the managers, are the managers equipped? If you suddenly see that all of or a lot of your conversations that mental health first aiders are having are being signposted to the manager, you can then reflect, are our managers ready for that? And we often have to then run manager training for a lot of our partners, because managers then realise there's a gap in their knowledge as well. I think for the wider business, you can then spot risks early. So if, for example, you're looking at the data and there's a particular location or across the board that maybe stress is high or anxiety is high, you can see those trends as they're happening in real time and do preventative work to prevent them getting further and mitigate those risks. And I think the final one, which is the biggest one for the people that they are supporting, is the safeguarding element. So when they log a conversation on the platform, they're asked, was this a safeguarding risk? Now, what we find is actually only 2.5% on average over the last 2 years of all conversations logged on our platform were safeguarding risks. I think this is quite a shocking statistic for some people because they see mental health first aid as a very reactive approach and that it is this crisis intervention. But actually, from those figures, a lot of the time it's not. It is proactive conversations, it's preventative. But having that ability to log whether it was a safeguarding incident or not, if it is, we have an automatic system with our platform where it informs the safeguarding lead or the designated person that's been requested. They will then find that out. And I often think without the platform or without logging those conversations, were those risks being reported? Were policies being followed? Were people getting the support they needed? So it's all about timely intervention as well. And the safeguarding element is key there.
I think it's such an important point to kind of follow on from as well, because we're going to come to the second reason in just a moment, which is, that oversight and being able to have the data and the oversight of the network protects the wider business as well. I can also see lots of people in the chat box asking, how do we log conversations and what kind of key things do we focus on and do we track? So what I want to do is I want to give you a quick sort of snapshot of the Everymind platform, which is a key part in the work that we do, which engages, protects, and sort of provides the oversight that you need as a business as well. So we should be able to see the demonstration here. And what you can see here is what the business would see and what the HR lead would see, which is the data feeding in, where are people being signposted to? What's the topics of conversation? And we can even drill down into locations, which is customized for every business. So to Emily's point, we can then start to see what challenges are occurring in which locations and provide proactive support in those areas as well. And alongside that, you can then see visibly the network. And in this example, who's having more conversations than others. So it gives you that visibility. But then also the mental health first aiders, they see this view. They get to obviously log the conversations that they are having. And again, there's lots of data points and we're not breaking confidentiality there as well. But as Emily mentioned, they also get live sessions to make sure that they are still confident and are able to ask questions to the Everymind team. They get resources and regular upskilling to make sure that they stay confident and can continue to support the people they're supporting in the business. But also after every conversation, as Emily mentioned, we prompt them. We're here to support them one-to-one, supervision, guidance as well, and they can book in a call with someone in the Everymind team within 24 hours of requesting it as well. So whether they've had that difficult conversation and need some more resources, they want to set a stronger boundary, the platform is there to help them as well. So that is a very, very quick overview and a demo of the platform, and it's just a small part of our overall partnership and offering and our approach to mental health first aid. But as you can kind of see there, we're providing that insight that the business needs, we're providing that safety, but also being able to support and develop the mental health first aiders along the way as well. So we're going to be going through a little bit more about what we're seeing with the data across the businesses that we're supporting, but alongside the platform, we also have our partnership, which is strategic guidance to make sure that you're setting these networks up correctly and safely and engagements as high as they possibly can be as well. So if you want to find out a little bit more about the support that we provide, we have our brand new one-day training, which launches the network and it reinvigorates them if you've already got mental health first aiders to bring them together to provide community connection as well. We have that one-day training now as well, alongside the year-long support and access to the platform that you've just seen there as well. And in fact, as part of today's session, we're going to be giving 10 people who inquire today who have over 15 mental health first aiders in their business a discounted rate to prove the impact that we know that we can have as a business. We keep hearing this all the time. We'd really love to work with Everymind, but we need to prove that impact. This is your ability to now be able to do that. So a link will pop up now if you want to find out more about the platform, the partnership, and how we can support you with your mental health first aid network in particular. please do reach out. We have, I believe, hundreds of people on this session, and obviously it's going to be the first 10. So move fast, click that link, book in a call with Sam and the team. He can hear a little bit more about your network, your challenges, introduce you more to the platform, show you what we are doing to help support hundreds of businesses along the way. And obviously you can find out a little bit more about that as well. So the first 10 people are obviously going to be able to get this at a reduced cost as well. Good stuff. So let's go on to reason number 2, which is very important, and what we've just seen there from the small demo of the platform: oversight of the network. If we're not tracking the impact, if we're not logging conversations, I believe all we're doing is guessing, right? We're literally throwing mud at the wall and hope that it sticks. Does this work? Does it not? So it's really time in 2025 in particular, we start to have clarity on what's working and what isn't, and where we're spending our money. So engagement's obviously a key focus for businesses, especially around well-being at the moment, but how does logging conversations help support engagement?
Yeah, so as you've just said there, really, without logging the conversations, you've got no idea if the network is being utilised, if mental health first aiders are active. So for us, that obviously you saw on the demo there, you can see which mental health first aiders are having conversations, how many conversations they're having, which locations are having the most conversations. We've seen with our data, as you mentioned, the report's coming out soon, but on average, it's only 39% of the mental health first aiders that are actively logging those conversations. So it's looking at that and identifying, why is that? Are there gaps in training? Is there gaps in awareness? Is stigma in certain areas of the business really high, and therefore the mental health first aiders there aren't getting sort of approached? So without that knowledge, you wouldn't have a clue if the network is being engaged with or not. And I think a really big thing for engagement for me is using that data to recognise the mental health first aiders who are having those conversations, who are logging them and showing the impact that they're having on the organisation and on their colleagues. And it can be a tough role, and they can often feel undervalued or overwhelmed. So actually, by having the ability to see how many conversations they're having, recognising them, we've got milestone graphics that we share when people hit a certain amount of conversations and things like that, to keep the momentum going on what can be such a tough responsibility. Also, on the flip side, you can then see who's not active. And identify if there is a training need. Is it support? Is it awareness? And you can act on that to then boost engagement. So you've got the data to, one, see if it is being engaged with, but then you've got the data to track whether you can then improve it.
Yeah, I think that's so key as well, because obviously we've worked with a few businesses now that have had historic networks of hundreds of mental health first aiders. And obviously it's been done in the old way of, let's just train as many people as possible. We'll put them on the intranet, or we'll signpost people to them in posters, and it's now out there, right? And then obviously, as you've mentioned, it's then the question of who's active and who's not. So we've had quite a few businesses, haven't we, that have implemented our support and our platform just in that way of almost resetting the network. It's like we've got hundreds here, but we're not sure who's engaged and who's not, and also how are people feeling. So using us and our approach to reset it with the new training, the platform, seeing who's visible and who's not, and being able to provide that ongoing support and confidence too as well. So again, I'm just thinking with Unipart, Claire was in our January session. I think she spoke a lot about this in regards to, she uses the data and the location in particular data that we have in our platform to see what support is needed in each location, because Unipart is such a widespread business. But then also, is there areas of the business where she needs more coverage? She needs more mental health first aiders. She needs more accessible support for that localized workforce in particular. So engagement is obviously a key sort of benefit of logging conversations and getting that ability to be able to support your engagement strategy overall. But with our partners too, who have this data available and have our support and who track engagement, what does that then mean from ensuring the network then runs smoothly moving forward?
Yeah, I think engagement's the first step, but then what we find one of the biggest challenges for people with their networks is it operationally supported and sustainable? So with the data, we can then see actually, are there any gaps for support or improvement? An example might be when we talk about locations, we found that on average 79% of the locations across the board are having conversations. which is amazing. It's really good to see that, and that's a high percentage. But what about the other 21%? Operationally, is there anything obstructing the network success in those areas? So as I mentioned, is stigma high there, or do we need to run some more awareness campaigns? Are there even mental health first aiders there in the first place? Something we find often is networks haven't been recruited through a proper process, and actually there could be 50 mental health first aiders in one area of the business and then no one somewhere else. So operationally looking at that is very helpful to understand what do we need to do, what do we need to change to make sure this runs smoothly. I think as well, when you look at the stakeholder engagement of these networks, when you've got data, it's much easier to sort of explain to managers, for example, what this role entails. So we found that on average conversations last 29 minutes. That can range from 5 to 50 minutes for a conversation. But actually the average is 29. So what does that mean for someone in their day-to-day role? Can they operationally step away from their normal role, remembering this is a voluntary role on the side of their sort of day job? Can they step away for 29 minutes? How would they do that? How would that impact work? And like we mentioned earlier with when people do potentially come overwhelmed with conversations, or there's too many happening, or there's a burden on one individual, you can then use that data to sort of get the buy-in for more recruitment, or to actually show stakeholders, this is what we need, this is what's going to be expected of them in their role, and then you can actually operationalise the network. And I think that's one of the biggest things people struggle with, and a lot of the work that my team do with their partners is actually what are the organisational barriers to this network being highly effective and engaged with.
Yeah, I think that's something that often goes overlooked, isn't it? Again, like, you know, when we think about our platform or our support, and you know, it's the support that you and your team provide the businesses that we work with. Because as I mentioned at the beginning of today's session, you know, we've taken a 2-day training course and we've turned it into a voluntary role within a business, and that opens up huge amount of risk, that opens up a huge amount of challenge. And we've never really sat down and considered, as you say, who are these individuals? Was there an assessment process? Is there a commitment template where, even though it's voluntary, we're able to kind of get them to commit to a certain level of hours or development, but in return as a business, we're going to commit this to them as well. You know, we haven't obviously looked at operationally, as you've mentioned. It's almost like if you want to go through the training, you can. So with all of that then being the approach that used to be what businesses did, it now opens up this huge challenge where engagement's low and there's risk and we don't know what's going on. So again, I think that should never be overlooked. There's a lot more to get these networks right, and there's a lot more to get engagement as high as it can possibly be as well. We're going to go on to reason number 3, which goes into strategy, but I'm really interested. Have you got a well-being strategy within your business? Give me a yes or a no, or I'm unsure, depending on your role here today as well. But I did a recent keynote last week at a summit, and I highlighted through the research that obviously we found that 53% of businesses have a well-being strategy. And actually that baffles me. I think when we look at the fact that, you know, suicide's the leading cause of death for men under 50, suicide's the leading cause of death for young people in the UK. The suicide rates are the highest they've been since 1999, even if we look at those drastic statistics. But then still, as businesses, we don't have a well-being or a mental health approach as a collective business. That baffles me. And also 53%. I'm sure if the team at Everymind looked at some of those strategies, they'd probably still rip them apart and say, you know, this could be better, this needs to be more robust, this needs to be more effective. So, you know, when we even think about that, 53% of businesses have a well-being strategy. Mental health first aid and other initiatives have almost just been plopped into the business, and we've hoped that it's worked in silo. So we really need to start to look at this collectively as an overall approach within our strategy as a business as well. I almost think of it as, you know, I think in COVID in particular, it accelerated the need for mental health support. We saw it at Everymind as well. But it's almost like we've just seen this mental health first aid, we've picked it off the shelf, we've implemented it into the business, and we've hoped that it's worked. So we really need to start to not look at it as a silo initiative and look at how we can embed it into a strategy moving forward as well. So we don't tick any more boxes, because there's been a lot of box ticking happening over the last however many years. So we know that it's important to build this into a strategy, but how do some of our partners use the conversations logs, the platform, the support that we provide them to then therefore guide their wellbeing strategy?
Yeah, so I think, as you've said, the Mental Health First Aid Initiative should be part of that bigger puzzle. This data can be used alongside other data points to support that strategy going forward. So a really obvious example with the data, you can then spot trends. So straight away you might notice, and I know we had Abby from Dreams join us previously, and we noticed within the first few months that a lot of the conversations happening in the organisation were around anxiety. So straight away we were able to support them with additional resources, signposting. They ran a session to support anxiety in the workplace, but also support the mental health first aiders on that topic, knowing that they're having a lot of conversations on this, and make sure they're equipped to deal with those conversations too. I think another example, that's a sort of a wider organisational level, but as we mentioned earlier, if you look into location specifics, we had another company that actually family and children was really low on the reasons of conversations for the whole organisation. But when you looked at locations, that was the number one reason for one of their locations. So drilling down deeper into that data can then help you give tailored support to particular areas of the business. Over time, what that does is we then can see sort of trends year on year, seasonally as well. We've also seen that with some of our sort of insurance companies, they have peak seasons throughout the year, and actually stress really increases throughout that. So looking at that, what can we do next year to prevent that? Or how can we support mental health first aiders in the lead up to that, or support colleagues in that area? We've just obviously had the real winter months. We saw grief increase over sort of Christmas and January. And then actually next year, how can you prevent or support or mitigate some of those areas before it happens? They're probably the key reasons that we see it feeding into that strategy. And my team often go and have sort of in-person planning days when we meet with our partners, and actually when they bring other data, you tend to find that if we're seeing anxiety be a number one reason on conversations, their EAP has flagged that they've got a lot of people coming through for anxiety, or their sickness records might highlight sort of the similar trends. So piecing it all together, we can then say, right, next year, how do we approach this? What can we do for the organisation as a whole? What can we do for the mental health first aiders? But also what can we do for particular areas in the business based on this data? So it's not just guessing. And I think that's been a lot of what organisations have done, is just think, oh, well, I think this is an issue, or I've heard this is an issue. I've seen on LinkedIn that someone else is running stress sessions. I should do that. No, this is data from your people that you can then implement.
Yeah. And I think this is important. Again, every business here is different, but if you have those hard to reach employees, like we always talk about, we work with different construction companies, Waits Construction, Porter Cabin, and others. You mentioned Dreams, that again have a very sort of spread out workforce in different areas. When we think about those types of businesses, you have people on the ground that are hard to reach. And often when we try and get them engagement surveys, or when we try and get them to attend certain sessions or whatever, it's very difficult to do. But when you have this network set up correctly, when you do it the Everymind way and it's operationally set up correctly, you then have very passionate, supported, confident people on the ground that can also provide that feedback loop and can provide that data and that oversight as well. And as we've already highlighted, and we'll touch on in just a minute as well, they can also almost be an extension to wellbeing to get more stuff out there as well. So on that point, how else can we use it to measure effectiveness and also use it to gather feedback?
Yeah, so I think we've obviously spoke about measuring the effectiveness of the network itself, but we also frequently see in the data that you can track the effectiveness of awareness campaigns, wellbeing campaigns that you do in the organisation. So, for example, when we partner with an organisation, we give them a launch webinar that goes out to all employees to show them who this network is, what they are, how you can approach them, what this means. And you often see conversations increase at that point. Some organisations then maybe don't do anything for a month, or they don't say anything for even a couple of weeks. And you can see that engagement with the network does slightly drop. So we straight away, as my team, we're monitoring that data constantly, and we flag, look, actually, engagement looks like it's dropping a bit. What can we do? Why do you think that is? And then we might run an additional session, or we share some posts or resources to boost engagement, and suddenly you see it go up. So I know Time to Talk Day, we shared mental health first aid spotlight guidance. So encouraging mental health first aiders to sort of create a video or a post on their internal comms channels to introduce themselves, why they became a mental health first aider, making it a bit more human. We then saw conversations across the board go up after that campaign went live for the organisations that ran it. So it's almost reinforcing and giving you that data that you wouldn't have otherwise had to show this is actually an effective way to reach our colleagues, because we're then seeing the mental health first aider network be more included. And in terms of feedback loops, like you mentioned, you're getting the data from the ground up. This is something quite rare in organisations. Often it's the other way around. You're looking at things, and you've got this network of passionate, empowered people that can give you so much insight into your organisation, into pockets and, like you say, hard to reach areas that maybe you struggle to access as a sort of organisation or from the head office, for example. You can then use that data and feed that back into the strategy, into the engagement campaigns that you run.
I'm interested as well. Give me a yes or a no. Do you struggle with engagement across your wellbeing initiatives, in particular mental health first aid? Give me a yes or a no in the chat box. I'm intrigued to see. We've seen someone with a yes and multiple exclamation marks after it. Got a few people saying no already, which is great. Again, if you don't have an engagement problem, that's fantastic to see. I think in a lot of the bigger businesses, it is much more difficult. But I was just, thinking about as you was talking there, it's, if you are struggling with engagement, definitely reach out, because as Emily mentioned, that's kind of what we focus on so much as a business and as a team, predominantly when we're looking at these networks. Because if we was to work with you, we implement our training, we implement our approach, the platform and the partnership, but engagement's not there, then it's going to be an ineffective spend of money. So we always are looking at how do we drive engagement? How do we make the support better for everyone involved? So again, if you are struggling with engagement, again, that's another opportunity to reach out to us and see where we can help you with that as well. And you touched about the feedback loop. I remember when we first looked into developing this support for people, because it kept coming up in conversations. And again, reflecting on my own experiences, I've had times where people have shared their stories with me and I've been very triggered by it. I've been very impacted by it. But I was fortunate at that time to have people in the Evermind team to lean on. So bringing that to more people was the goal. But I remember when we were looking at, is this a solution that people need? We asked HR, did they believe their mental health first aiders were being spoken to? And I believe the majority of people, 90% plus of those individuals, said no, the engagement's really low. But then when we did some surveys for mental health first aiders and we said, how often are you having conversations? A lot of them said weekly. So actually the challenge there is not that it's low engagement. The challenge is they're not emailing HR every time they've had a conversation. They're not knocking on HR's door every time they've had a conversation to tell them. So this is a way of having that feedback loop, which is super important as well. And this then feeds into the bigger picture of ROI and building that business case. Probably the question on many people's minds, like how do you get more budget? How do you get more support in place? So why is data and tracking conversations therefore then useful to provide ROI and be able to kind of build business cases off the back of it?
Yeah, so a lot of HR people will know it's very difficult to get sign off and buy-in from stakeholders when you have no tangible evidence on an intervention. So this data that we're talking about today, that gives you that quantifiable impact as opposed to just sort of anecdotal feedback to share and say, look, this is how effective the network is, this is how much it's being used, this is what we're seeing to be effective or not effective, and this is why we need XYZ budget, or we need to have continued investment in it. I think as well, we've seen from the average of conversations across the board with the partners we work with, the most common reason for conversations for mental health first aiders is work-related issues. And actually, as a business, they've now got data they would never have had before, and that can then guide future sort of policy changes. It might be that they need to address wider issues in an organisation or culturally. They've now got the evidence to show this is why we need the support from you. This is why we need to run X campaign. I think as well, when we talk about business case, we are talking about people, and I think it's very hard sometimes to quantify the impact that this can have on people. It's good to have feedback and have those qualitative statements from people, but actually when you put it in numbers and when you look at the number of people that are reaching out for support, it's crucial to have that sort of data behind it. And we know that the more proactive interventions have a higher ROI. We've seen from our data, majority of conversations are actually just chat only. They're not being pushed to sort of GP, line manager, EAP. Most of them are just looking for a listening ear. And to me, that really highlights how proactive this intervention can be when done right. It's actually preventing people needing that professional support. They just want someone to listen to. And then actually that can, in most cases, be enough. And that's what our data is showing. So to be able to then show the organisation that this is actually a proactive model, and that's quite contradictory to what a lot of people think. When you think of first aid, it's a very reactive approach, but in most cases, it's not. It's proactive. So that, again, is highlighting the sort of benefits that these networks can have.
Yeah, there's 2 points there. I'm a huge advocate of therapy, and it's helped me massively over the last 16 years in particular through losing my dad. But I always sort of think it's a very difficult way of getting support too. Like, I don't look forward to therapy, but it's a really important support mechanism that I still have in place. But what I found to be very helpful over the last, however many years, is a good conversation with someone, a good conversation with a colleague where, yesterday or whatever it might be, just need to get something off my chest. And again, that's the vital role that these networks play. They are proactive, and they can prevent absences. They can prevent crisis situations as well. But then the other thing that I was reflecting on there, when you think about ROI, is, as we know, we've started to work with more businesses where, they've potentially previously, in the old way, spent almost 6 figures on training mental health first aiders. And, years have passed, and they're almost saying, we've almost just burnt that money. We don't know where it's gone, the impact of it, the effectiveness of it. And it's almost now we're starting again. But as you've mentioned, now being able to track that impact, look at the effectiveness, look at the ROI, you can then start to grow that network in a more effective way. So you're consistently having that ROI and building the business case from there as well. So we've only got 15 minutes left then. We've gone through so much here already in today's session. And obviously the report is there, the findings. And once again, we're going to be sharing an updated version of that report very soon too, with a lot of the data that Emily mentioned. I think the average conversation length is a really important metric, and there's more in there too. So again, you're going to be able to get that very soon once you've subscribed. But I'm really interested in what's one key takeaway that every single one of you wants to implement after today's session. And it could be that you're just going to have a chat with someone in the Everymind team to find out some more, or to get some more sort of questions answered. Or there could be something that off the back of what we've shared, you want to implement it straight away. What's one key takeaway that you want to implement off the back of today's session? And Em, I'm going to come to you. Like, what's one key thing that you'd like to for people to think about doing as well?
So many. I think for me, like we said at the very beginning, the cost of doing nothing is higher than the cost of doing something. And you're not opening a can of worms by tracking these conversations. You're actually reducing risk. And I think more importantly, you're also opening that door to data-led insights that you can then guide your wellbeing strategy going forward. So it's making it really relevant to your organisation.
Love that. And lots coming in here about, doing mental health first aid spotlights, implementing safeguarding elements in the work that they're doing, speaking to mental health first aiders about how we can track conversations as well, and a company-wide process for all mental health first aiders across our companies. So again, having that almost commitment and that network structure as well. Edward also says more support for mental health first aiders, which is great to see as well. So I also just kind of want to echo one of the key things that I want a lot of people to take away is, I think we can now say we're at a time where confidently, if we have mental health first aiders within a business and we're still signposting colleagues to speak to those individuals, but you're sat here without any support for those individuals, without any way of knowing what's going on with the network or how mental health first aiders are feeling or what conversations they're having, this is going to be quite a bold statement. I personally think pull it completely. Like, if we've got this initiative in place and there are individuals there that we're signposting our colleagues to speak to about their mental health, which is very complex and very personal, but we're still not willing to put support in place, regular development, look at it from a sort of organizational point of view, and we're not tracking the conversations and tracking that impact, I think it's better to not have it at all. Just almost settle for the fact that we've put these individuals through 2 days of training, everyone should have more training on mental health for sure, but not being comfortable with having this voluntary role in the business without doing it properly, without doing it in a supportive way. So that's something that I've definitely been speaking to a lot more people about, those with hundreds of mental health first aiders that still don't have that support in place, still don't have a lot of what we've spoken about here in particular. Just pull it or reset it, do it a different way, run people through, new training. This is what we do with our approach, the new training, the ongoing support, the ongoing development, and obviously that way to track engagement, and obviously be able to prove that impact along the way as well. So I think this is the approach that we take at Everymind, and it's something that we're so confident about because I think, as I mentioned at the beginning of today's session, everyone in the Everymind team has their personal experience. We're already passionate about helping those that help others, and it's really about doing it this new way, this Everymind way, to actually reset mental health first aid and reinvent mental health first aid in the workplace in particular. So if, again, you want to find out a little bit more about our training, our approach, the ongoing support, and the platform that we have, once again, the first 10 that inquire that have over 15 mental health first aiders within their business, we're going to be giving, once again, that discounted rate for a short period of time. And that, again, includes the training, the year-long support program, and everything that I've spoken about today, including Emily's team and their support to help you drive engagement and get this right and set it up safely as well. So do reach out. Once again, the Inquire page should pop up. Book in a call with someone in the Everymind team, and we'll be able to guide you and help you with that support too. So just coming to a close, if you do have any questions, please pop it into the chat box. I'll do my best to come to some of your questions. But I also, once again, want to reiterate that on Wednesday the 9th at 1 p.m, we're going to be having Peter Kelly and Stuart Mace join us on the session to talk about why mental health first aid isn't safe in the workplace. It's a great extension from this session already because we're going to be diving into some of those risks and liabilities and actual real life scenarios where businesses have got this wrong and the implications of the current approach. So again, join us for that session completely for free. And again, that's Wednesday the 9th at 1 p.m. Hopefully we'll see you there. And then the other sort of shout out before we come to some questions to wrap up today's session is also if you want to find out more about the work that we're doing at Everymind, some of the resources or the report that we have, and also up and coming sessions, you can also give us a follow on LinkedIn. Once again, LinkedIn, we'll either drop a link in the chat box or it'll pop up in just a moment. Give us a follow on LinkedIn. That's going to be the first place that you can hear more about the updates that we're sharing as a business as well. So let's go through some questions, if you don't mind, Em. One of the questions that I have preempted as opposed to come into some of the questions in the chat box, just firstly, is in the report, one of the key things that stood out to me was mental health first aiders feeling out of depth when it comes to crisis. That was the number one topic that they cited they needed some more support with. Everyone here sort of taking that information on board. What have we done to help partners sort of overcome that challenge for mental health first aiders?
Yeah, I think, as we mentioned earlier, those safeguarding incidents happen very infrequently, but they have the highest risk associated with them. And I think mental health first aiders worry about that. When you're not practicing those skills regularly, actually, you worry you're going to forget it. Oh, am I going to say the right thing? How do I help in that scenario? So as you've mentioned, we have the Skills Centre that has so many resources available. We've got case studies. We've also got run-throughs of our team sort of demonstrating how to approach these situations and the risk assessment process. But I think primarily what we always say is the mental health first aider role cannot end with the 1 or 2 day training course. So we have got our own crisis intervention workshop that we've been running quite a lot recently, CPD accredited for them to attend. And it's just going into it in more detail, more depth. Those typical mental health first aid training, they do cover it, but it's one part of a very big sort of syllabus. So having a dedicated workshop on that where the mental health first aiders can go through and sort of role play these scenarios and what they should and shouldn't say to help these colleagues that might be struggling really at crisis point. That's what I'd say probably we have done a lot of since that report came out, because it's the biggest risk, and it's the one that we want to get right, and we want to make sure mental health first aiders know how to handle those situations if they do arise.
Yeah, I think as you said earlier, 2.5% of conversations with safeguarding incidents that were logged. So as you say, it doesn't always happen, but as I've also cited with the statistics, there's a likelihood that we might have a conversation that is someone in crisis in the workplace. And you know, I've had those conversations myself. It's very daunting and overwhelming. And if I've just done some training, you know, I don't know, a couple of years ago, I'm probably not going to be confident in that situation. So it's why we offer that, as you say, support afterwards, to be able to get that guidance and debrief, but also in the moment support to help in those crisis situations too. Been two questions coming here, two that I just want to address, and then we will close out if no one else has got any questions. But someone said, is there any ideas you can provide for businesses who don't have budget but want to kind of track mental health first aid conversations? I think for that person there, as I highlighted earlier, Ben, some companies will use forms or spreadsheets, but one of the things that I would definitely say is just be assured that it's being securely stored in your system. So making sure that there's no obviously breach, that anyone can now access that data in particular. But yeah, as I say, that might be another alternative for you as well. And then also someone mentioned about support and support for mental health first aiders. So someone mentioned maybe, you know, directing them to the employee assistance program. We always kind of highlight when it comes to support for mental health first aiders, it's very nuanced and specific. You know, what we created with our support service is it's designed for mental health first aiders in a business. And we have that visibility that if someone from, as an example, Dreams comes and speak to us, we have that relationship with Dreams as well. We can obviously direct them to potential some internal support that they have in a business. Whereas I think employee assistance programs for the most part are very generic. They're still very based on counseling as well. So anything there, like if obviously we're signposting mental health first aiders to kind of get supervision from employee assistance programs, what would you advise?
Yeah, I think I obviously mentioned earlier that a lot of the conversations we have with mental health first aiders aren't actually themselves struggling. It's more sort of nuances in the conversations they've had, or wanting that reassurance they've said the right thing, or actually this is where I've signposted them to. Is there anywhere else that might be able to help them? If you signpost mental health first aiders to an EAP or a Shout helpline, or I know like people who have been signposted to Samaritans before, they're sort of more for the individual's mental health. And actually what we're seeing is they don't need help themselves always. They actually just need that sort of more operational assistance or organisational support, which is where our support, I think, differs, because we can advise, look, this is your process, or this is who you should reach out to if there's a safeguarding issue. This is another organisation you could signpost to for someone that's grieving. Whereas if you signpost them to Samaritans, that's going to be a very different non-workplace specific support they get access to. So obviously it depends on the reason they are needing help, but from what we're seeing, is most of the time it's not actually their own mental health, it's more the organisational support they need, which we can then tailor and give them that.
Yeah, and also as you say, it's just that reassurance that I've just had this conversation with a colleague. The colleague might be experiencing an eating disorder as an example. This is how I navigated it. Did I do a good job? And sometimes just getting that assurance of, yes, you did everything correct. Here's some other signposting options. Here's some other resources that you can share with that colleague, is all they need in that moment to give them confidence and empower them to keep having conversations with more people as well. So hopefully that helps with that question too. So we are now coming to an end. So I just want to say a huge thank you to you, Emily, for joining us once again. And hopefully everyone in the chat box can give some accolades to Emily. You always inspire me with all of your data and all of your knowledge in particular. As you know, I'm not very data driven, so it's good to have you on the sofa with me. And also just a huge thank you to the whole of the Everymind team for the amount of work that goes into these sessions. I think everyone here can see this isn't something that we just do after an hour's work. There's a lot of work that goes into this every single month to provide these sessions to you completely for free. So a huge thank you to the Everymind team, all of our partners and everyone who joined us here on today's session. And just one final reflection from me, as I mentioned at the beginning of today's session, you know, it was 16 years since I lost my dad to suicide yesterday. And I was just literally reflecting as Emily was speaking, and I'm still sat here trying to keep going and trying to keep the awareness going. And I think it's a very difficult time when we look at some of those statistics and we think about some of the changes that still need to be made. But everyone here today is here to try and help and try and do this differently and try to obviously do it in a new way. So I really want to encourage all of you to just keep going. You know, as I say, we're all going to be here to try and help as many people as we possibly can. And who knows, maybe in 16 years later, I'll still be here a little bit older, still trying to raise the awareness and make change happen. But thank you to all of you for joining. And we're looking forward to maybe seeing a lot of you on the next session with Peter and Stuart in April as well. Enjoy the rest of your day. And hopefully we'll speak to a lot of you who inquire through the offer that I mentioned earlier too. Speak very soon.